see you coming to the meditation and the Dhamma talk on Friday night. I think life for all of us would be much more peaceful, much happier, much more skillful if we could take this opportunity every night of the week. Take an opportunity to come and sit meditation every night of the week. At the end of the day, we know we're going to go and now sit quietly for half an hour and maybe have a discussion on Dhamma. I think it would do a great deal to help us have a center of peace, a center of clarity, from which we could then relate in our ordinary daily situations. And whenever we have a center of peace and clarity, life is peaceful and clear, or has greater peace and greater clarity. However, that is a wonderful idea, wonderful thought. I don't know whether it could be a reality, as most people seem to have so many other things which require attention and time. But at least maybe this one night of the week we set aside for this very skillful activity. Introspection, meditation, making oneself calm or calmer, even if the mind still won't stop, still won't become fully concentrated. Don't experience that absorption that you've heard about, but still it becomes a little bit calmer, a little bit clearer, a little bit more peaceful. And this evening, you may not know, is in actual fact a very, very special evening. Just by coincidence, this Friday happens to be, according to some calendars, the full moon. I think according to the Australian calendar, the full moon is tomorrow. But according to the calendar which we use in the monastery, today is the full moon. And it's a very special full moon, not just an ordinary full moon. The month of July, full moon of the month of July is called Asalha, which probably doesn't mean anything to you, but that's just the name of the month. It's the 8th lunar month. And the full moon in the 8th lunar month commemorates a very important, really very, very important occasion. It's the reason why you're here. In some ways, it's the most important occasion in all of the Buddhist happenings. Even, in some ways, even more important than the enlightenment of the Buddha. Although this occasion could never have happened if there had not been the enlightenment of the Buddha previously. While I was in Thailand, I hope you all went and celebrated Visakha Puja, which is the commemoration of the enlightenment, birth, enlightenment, and passing away of the Buddha 2 months ago, in May, full moon of May. But today, as full moon, in some ways is even far greater importance, because it commemorates the beginning of the teaching career of the Buddha. It commemorates the first teaching, the first presentation of the Dhamma by the Lord Buddha. And that is really what's important for us. That the Buddha was enlightened, well, that's a wonderful thing. But what is of real importance to us is that he taught something that we could use, relate to, apply, develop in our own lives. That we too could then achieve what he achieved. We too could become peaceful, we too could become enlightened. So this is really a wonderful thing, that the Buddha, being enlightened, having found something rather special, took the step to teach it to others, recognizing that others could also do it, took the step to teach it. And so today marks that occasion when Lord Buddha, 2 months after his enlightenment, arrived at Isipatana, the deer park, where there were five sort of ascetics, 5 mendicants, 5 meditators, 5 renunciants, whatever you wish to call them, 5 monks if you wish, abiding. They were staying there. These monks had in actual fact lived with the Buddha previously, because the Buddha practiced for a long time before he became enlightened. If you think you've been at it for a long time, after 3 months you've been meditating, or you've been coming here for a whole 2, 3, 4 years. Well, the Buddha, before his enlightenment, he practiced extraordinarily diligently for 6 years. So you've still got a few years to go yet. The story is that actually the Buddha left home at the age of 29 and went off to seek liberation from the bondage of doubt, worry, fear, anger, greed, the bondage of all that is mortal, the bondage of birth, old age, sickness and death, the bondage of being a limited little being in this whole universe, not really knowing who one is, not really knowing why we're here, not really being able to be at peace with life, wanting to seek a way, a path, how to be free from this bondage. So he went in quest of this, and during his search he practiced with a couple of different teachers, developed different meditation skills, and then tried the very austere practices, almost the complete opposite of his life as a prince. The princely luxuries, comfort, ease, all the pleasures, he'd experienced all that and recognized that that was it's not all that much. Once you've got it, it's not as much as you thought it was. It's like when you don't have something, it can mean so much to you. Then when you get it, you realize that it's not really all that much after all. Because that sense of gratification is just a momentary thing. And then you find you still feel unsatisfied. And people who have the greatest amount are the ones who usually feel the most unsatisfied. Because you've tried so many things and that gratification just doesn't last. And then it becomes more and more difficult to be satisfied. More and more difficult to find gratification because you need more and more complicated, extreme experiences in order to feel that same experience of gratification. So Siddhartha, after he'd been a prince for 29 years, I think he began to see that life was just not really satisfying. All those pleasures and that were not really satisfying, not completely at peace, not completely contented. And he probably became quite jaded by the whole thing. He had enough of it all. So that just following that path wasn't going to take him to contentedness. Following desire, indulging, wasn't going to bring contented feeling. So as an opposite to that, he went off and as an ascetic and self-torture, just tormenting himself physically, going to the extreme of asceticism, fasting. Many of you have seen the picture, the statue or the picture of the Bodhisattva they called Siddhartha. When Prince Siddhartha left the home and became a mendicant monk, a seeker of truth and liberation. He's called a bodhisattva, one striving for enlightenment, for Buddhahood. And you see quite often these pictures, statues of him when he was doing the self-mortifications, the practices of austerities. And he's sitting slightly bent over, much like some of us sit sometimes. And he's just skin and bone. You can literally see all the bones, the rib case, and then all the veins sticking out between just under the skin. And it's just skin and bone. And the story went that when he touched his belly, he could feel his spine. And when he tried to touch his spine, he felt his belly. That must have gotten quite thin. He did that. And while he was doing that, of course, that sort of practice is extremely impressive, isn't it? It's like when we see somebody doing something very, very ascetic, we feel, oh, really, we're impressed, very impressed with these 5 attendants who were looking after him. We're very impressed by this practice. They said, the Bodhisattva Siddhartha, or they just Gautama, his surname, definitely going to achieve something great if he keeps this up. And so they're really encouraging him to fast even longer, to punish himself even more. But Siddhartha did this to the point of where he collapsed. And they thought he died. He just seemed lifeless body there. Obviously he'd gone too far. But he hadn't died, and when he came to, he said, well, I've tried all this asceticism and it's not getting me very far. I'm not even very peaceful. And then he decided on a middle way, recollecting as a child that while he's sitting under the shade of a tree, he just sat, and just quite spontaneously, obviously from past good merit, past karma, if you wish to say, his mind just inclined towards peacefulness, and he turned to the breath, and just by being with the breath, as a child, his mind became one-pointed. He attained absorption, but not an extreme absorption where he lost all sense of knowing. His mind was pure, and his mind was very malleable, workable. It could still function. There was awareness there, very peaceful, clear. And so Gautama or Siddhartha or the Bodhisattva, it's all the same person, thought maybe a mind like that could really be used to look deeply and to understand, rather than just torturing this body. Maybe I should work on the mind. And not just work on the mind to get it into a state of high ecstasy or high absorption where you black out, but rather just to work on the mind to bring it to a state of this malleable, balanced clarity, stillness, with full awareness. And so he took food again, practiced meditation, and on the full moon of May, with that meditation leading to that great clarity of mind, precision of mind, he was able to penetrate very deeply into his own nature, which is the nature of existence, recognizing truth. That was his enlightenment. And he stayed in a blissful state for many days, until, out of compassion, he decided, I should teach this path. Though it is difficult, others will be able to see. They too will attain this peace, this knowledge. Other people can open their minds just like I have opened my mind. And so he eventually decided to go and teach those 5 ascetics who had left him. And it was on this day, full moon of July, that the Buddha, newly enlightened Buddha, arrived at Isipatana, and he found these 5 monks sitting around, probably meditating, because they were very diligent, very devout seekers themselves, these monks, but as yet not truly enlightened or peaceful. And when they saw the Buddha walking towards them, by now the Buddha had become quite, if he sort of filled out a little bit. because he had taken food, so his body was back to a normal state. So he looked as if he, quite ordinary, I assume, in sort of filled out flesh on his bones instead of just skin. And you can imagine quite a radiant being, blissful being, peaceful being, just a radiance of such a being. Yet these 5 ascetics saw him, and they said, oh, here he comes, the one who's resorted to indulgences, gone back to the soft life. He's taken to eating again. And they thought to ignore him. They said, they said between themselves, we'll just ignore him. We won't even talk to him, because he's obviously given up the search. But as he approached, they just couldn't, because his radiance was, and the presence of a being, enlightened being, the peacefulness, the radiance, was quite overwhelming. They couldn't stop themselves. One of them went and took his bowl. Another one prepared a seat for him, and they sat down. And they were very courteous to him, because obviously he had a presence. But they still thought, well, he's just gone back to the easy life. And so they were not very receptive to any teaching at first. And he said, I will teach you, bhikkhus. And they said, oh, what could you teach us? After all, we were with you when you were doing all that really good practice, and you even then, you hadn't attained anything. So what can you possibly know now that you've resorted to the easy life? And he tried again, and again they sort of, no, you don't know. And in the end he said, listen, before, did I ever say that I was enlightened? Did I ever say that I had attained anything beyond the mortal? And they said, well, no, you never claimed that before. Well, I claim it now. This is putting it in sort of more modern terminology. But they at least then paid heed. And he began his teaching by giving what they call the first sermon, the first discourse, the first formal presentation of this path that leads to enlightenment. They call it the turning of the wheel of Dhamma. The wheel is representing of the Dhamma, turning it, starting it rolling. And it was on this full moon night, just after dusk, probably about the same time that we sat meditation this evening, sitting in this deer park, under this tree, the Buddha on a seat with the 5 ascetics listening. He set rolling the wheel of Dhamma, beginning to teach the path that he had found, the path that is a middle way, the path that he had trod and arrived at a result which he had been seeking for years. The result was peace, enlightenment. So he began his teaching not by making, not saying anything fantastic, not by talking about the supernatural, not by talking about the gods or the heavens or the hells or past lives or future lives, not by talking about any sort of thing, anything fantastic. But to these 5 ascetics who were very, very spiritually evolved, he began by saying, monks, there are 2 extremes which you should avoid in your spiritual quest. The one extreme is that of indulgence, following desire, attachment, greed, lust, getting lost in the sensory world, seeking for gratification from the sensory world. That this is unbecoming of one who is interested in realization and enlightenment. It leads to just confusion. It leads to just a jaded mind. And then he said, monks, there is the other extreme which should also be avoided. And that is the extreme of tension, the extreme of self-mortification, self-torment, too tight, the extreme of negativity or suppression or repression. These are all terms that we use today to indicate this extreme, which is the opposite of just following, is keeping everything down, tightening up, anger, suppression, repression, guilt, hating oneself, hating the world. This is the self-torment. It creates pain, it creates misery in oneself. It is not becoming of one who's seeking peace. So avoid these two extremes. I have found the middle way which is conducive to peace, conducive to light, conducive to wisdom, conducive to knowledge, conducive to nibbana, which is liberation from bondage. And then he said, and what is this middle way? And then he taught the Eightfold Path. Not some great, fantastic, great philosophical presentation, and just the Eightfold Path. So what is the middle way that leads to this liberation? It is this noble Eightfold Path, namely right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. By cultivating this path, you will come to peace, come to insight, come to wisdom, come to liberation. So this was the first teaching. And then he went to expound the Four Noble Truths in conjunction with the Eightfold Path. To understand the Four Noble Truths, to penetrate the Four Noble Truths. The truth that life, mortal existence, conditioned existence, is impermanent, can never truly satisfy, can never truly gratify. That life is a sense of one frustration after another when one is operating from desire. However, there is an end to that frustration, that dis-ease of the mind. And the path to it, again, is this Eightfold Path. So, the reason why I said this was I feel the most important happening in the history of Buddhism is because what is really of relevance to us in Buddhism? That the Buddha was enlightened? If it was just that, it would have been forgotten long ago. And then it would only be a matter of, either you believe it or you don't believe it. Maybe it was recorded in a book, say, 2,500 years ago there was a prince called Siddhartha Gautama, lived in northern India, who became enlightened. You read that in a book and you believe it or you don't believe it. Still, doesn't mean very much, does it? If you believe it, maybe you'll worship the statue of the Buddha. If you don't believe it, maybe you'll just make fun of it. Still doesn't mean very much, does it? What makes it important is the fact that there's this Eightfold Path that's taught for us to actually apply, to follow, to cultivate, to see for ourselves the results, to know for ourselves the benefits, to realize for ourselves the fruits of it. So this is the real importance of Buddhism, when it becomes of relevance to us, is when there is a path for us to cultivate. So this Eightfold Path is, for us, in the Buddhist tradition, one could say almost like the Ten Commandments in Christianity. But they're not. The Eightfold Path is that. It's not 8 commandments. It's 8 aspects of training that we're going to try and cultivate, work in, 8 areas in our lives which we're going to investigate, cultivate, develop, in order to bring about the ripening of our human potential. The human potential is to be enlightened, to be freed from mortal conditions, to be completely peaceful. The path is the way to do it. So this teaching of the Eightfold Path is a great occasion for us. Tonight commemorates that. So I thought I'd speak a little bit about this Eightfold Path, because although all of you have read about it, or may even know about it, but just to emphasize how important it is, all the other teachings and everything. But still, this is the path the Buddha said brought about peace, enlightenment. This is the path the Buddha laid down for liberation. So it's something very worthwhile contemplating. We say that Buddhism is a teaching based on wisdom instead of a teaching based on faith. And the reason for that is just, you can see from the way this Eightfold Path begins. It begins with right view and right thought, which is to do with wisdom. It's not accepting or believing. It doesn't say, you must believe and then you will do. It says, have right view, have right thought. But when the Buddha, what is this right view? What is right thought? Because there are so many views, aren't there, in the world today? So many views and opinions about the past, the future, what's right, what's wrong. There's so many views, and it's so confusing, isn't it? How do you know what is right? How do you know who's telling the truth? How do you know anything? How can you say this is right view? So, we begin with right view. Well, what is this right view? Does it mean that we're going to attach to some belief now that the Buddhist way is the best way, and the Buddha said this and he said that, and every time we meet people we're going to start telling them what the Buddha said? How do you know that the Buddha said that? How do you know that that is exactly what he said? And how do you know that that's really true anyway, even if he said it? So what is right view? Right view in our approach, in the Buddhist approach, rather than just taking random views, is beginning with what we can observe now, ourselves. Beginning to reflect on the now, what we can observe. What can we observe now? Well, let's look at our own lives. First thing is to take full responsibility for oneself. Full responsibility. You must accept full responsibility for yourself. You are the creator of your own karma. We do this chanting quite often. I am the born of my karma, heir to my karma, related to my karma, owner of my karma. Whatever karma I do, good or bad, of that I shall be the heir. As karma is a strange word for some of you, although it's a very common word in Buddhism and Hinduism. And maybe some of you have heard that word. I've heard it used in many different ways. And there's one book I saw in Melbourne, it was labelled Kamma Cola or Karma Cola. As quite a strange title for a book, I thought. But I am the owner of my karma. What that means is that I am responsible for my life. What I am now, I have created. I have created this. Not someone else, I have created this. My actions, my tendencies in the past has caused this result to appear now. I take full responsibility for that. I don't blame anybody. I don't blame anything. I don't blame any being. Take full responsibility. I am completely responsible for my karma. This here, this body, this mind, my tendencies, my temperament, I am the owner of this. In the sense is, I created this through my actions, volitional speech, volitional thoughts. My volitional tendencies result in this being here. This is not a reward, it's not a punishment. This is a result of my past existence, this life, past lives. So this is very important to start off with, because unless you have that, if you start saying, well, somebody else is responsible, or it's just by chance, you take away all incentive to do anything. Now, if somebody else is responsible for making me like this, regardless of anything volitional I have, I'll just leave it up to him to make me what he wants. I'll just do nothing. Eat, drink, be merry, do anything I want. Or if it's just by chance, what's the point? Just do what I want anyway. So there is no incentive, is there? Why would you bother to take any steps to improve? Why would you bother to take any steps to liberate? But when you come to this realization, I am the owner of my karma, this result here is I have created. And the result in the future I am creating now. The way I act, the way I speak, the way I think. This is going to shape the future. Then you begin to have tremendous responsibility in the way you shape your life. What do we cultivate? What do we develop? What do we abandon within us? What do we change within us? You will only have an incentive to do this when you recognize that I am responsible. You are responsible for yourself. Some of you have heard the story of Milarepa. Milarepa was a young man in Tibet around the 12th century or something like that AD, and he did some nasty things in his life. I think many of us have done some nasty things, either big or small. Milarepa had done some really nasty things, and then he recognizes that, well, I've done so many nasty things, so much unskillful karma, that I'm really in for it. When the results of all this comes, it's going to be really awful. And then he had this tremendous incentive to practice meditation, to cultivate spiritually, to free the mind. And he went and studied with a great guru, great teacher, Marpa, translator. And Marpa put him through all sorts of interesting games and torturing him. But he had that tremendous tenacious commitment because he knew he was responsible for what he had done. He's responsible for his life. So he had a tremendous incentive to work, cultivate, liberate the mind. This is the same with us. Recognizing we're fully responsible for ourselves. We're fully responsible for this. We'll be fully responsible for the future result. Gives us incentive to cultivate the path. So this is an important aspect of beginning to have a view of ourselves and our lives. The other aspect of right view is to begin to understand the nature of the Four Noble Truths, even just on an intellectual basis. And all of you have, even though you haven't maybe not verbalized it in your mind. But the fact that you are sort of even interested in something like meditation, giving up a night to come and sit meditation, listen to a talk like this, must indicate that you have observed something with regards to the material world, sensory existence. You've indicated by coming here that you've seen a limitation there. That just sensory experience, material world, mortal existence, is just not really satisfying. You've begun to recognize the unsatisfactoriness of the sensory world. Begin to recognize the dis-ease in the mind in one form or another. Some people experience it one way, other people in another way. In other words, you begin to recognize dukkha, of the first of the Four Noble Truths. There must be some sort of dukkha that you've seen. Dukkha, they usually translate as suffering, which makes it sound as if all of us have been put through the sort of the torture chamber and had our fingers screwed and like put on the rack and all sorts of things, and then, oh, this is suffering. But most of us actually, especially in the Western world, come from a very comfortable, pleasant sort of life. I mean, but the dukkha that we recognize, or the suffering that we recognize, is the suffering in our own minds. That dis-ease of the mind, that comes from what? We begin to notice that it's not because of Joe Blow or because of Mr. Hawke being the way he is, or because of this country or the weather, but it's something to do with our minds. Something in our mind is making this dukkha, this suffering, this ease. The confusion in our minds, the fear, the obsessions, the anger, the desire. We begin to see, oh, this is causing suffering. And again, that gives us an incentive to do something about it. An incentive to do something about it from within, rather than changing the whole world all at once. We recognize that where it needs to be done is within here, this person. And then as we begin to practice a little bit, even just a little bit, one begins to see, oh, maybe there is a cessation of this dukkha, this suffering, this ease. You begin to experience a bit of peace. And then you have even more incentive to cultivate the path. So again, now this is what we mean by right view. It's not a belief in these things. It's you observe, you reflect, you notice your own life, what you can see for yourself in your life now, so that you begin to have this perspective. I'm responsible for myself. I take full responsibility. There is dissatisfaction. The sensory world doesn't seem to be able to give me true satisfaction. There is dis-ease in the mind. I feel a sense of lack of peace. And it's not because of this person or that person or this place or that place. It seems to be coming from me. The problem is here. And I can maybe do something about it. This is right view. Cultivating right view. How do I do something about it? Then you hear maybe the Eightfold Path. And then you have this incentive, well, let's try cultivating this Eightfold Path. And so you begin by taking an interest in the teachings of the Buddha, this path. The path of right view, which we've started with, you're already on the path. As soon as you start reflecting like this, you're already on the path. Even though before you came across Buddhism, you're already on the path, because you're starting to reflect, you're starting to observe life. That's why so many people say, as soon as I heard this teaching of the Buddha, it seemed to ring true to me. Because they were already on the path, they'd already started to reflect on life and themselves, their experience. I can't say that I had that, actually. Some people have this tremendous affinity towards Buddhism. I met one young man. He came to the monastery in Thailand, and while he was living in Australia, he was like a surfer. He'd won some championship at surfing or something or other, which I thought was very trivial at the time, but it was probably a very big thing for him to win this surfing championship. He was from New South Wales, the Gold Coast. And he used to live on the beach in these just under a little bit of a shelter. And one day he laid down, and he'd never heard of Buddhism, or he'd never seen picture of the Buddha as far as he could remember. And he laid down and he saw this image of the Buddha floating through the air, this statue. And he didn't know what it was. Until he came to Thailand on his surfing, sort of just going around the world, and he saw these Buddha statues, and he recognized that that's the image that he'd seen so vividly. And so he decided to ordain, become a monk. I thought that was quite fantastic. Obviously some predisposition there. But he also disrobed. It didn't stay very long. So sometimes the fantastic things like that, they don't have much to carry them through. And sometimes the most ordinary things last a lot longer. And but, some people just, very strange things happen to them like that. That makes, as soon as they hear or see a picture of the Buddha or hear this teaching, something clicks. Oh, that's definitely, I have this tremendous affinity for it. Because, maybe it is something from past life, or maybe it's more like having, you've observed life, you've observed your own life, you've observed your own mind. And this teaching is talking about that very thing, your life, your mind, your experience. So obviously it must make sense, must ring a bell, because it's talking about what you've been observing. So when we hear this teaching, quite often we say, yes, it makes sense. And then we want to pursue it. So the Buddha then presented this path, like a way, an ordinary. It's not like superhuman, because he was teaching just human beings. He wasn't. Some people say that the Buddha went to, like when one of the rains retreats, the Buddha was supposed to have gone up to one of the heaven realms. I'm not sure whether it was the heaven of the 33s or Dusita heaven, one of the heaven realms. He went up there to teach his mother, who died just 7 days after he was born. And so the story goes, and it's actually quite interesting, because in the whole text of the Buddhist canon, they say, where the Buddha spent this rain retreat, where the Buddha spent that rains retreat, and the Buddha was supposed to have spent 45 rains retreat, but there's one missing. They don't say where he spent that. So the story is that he spent that one up in the heaven, teaching his mother and all the other devas. And what he taught there, they say, was the Abhidhamma, the higher Dhamma, which is very complicated, to say the least. It's a really analytical, complicated set of description and analysis of the mind and matter and the world, and really, really complicated. But when he taught human beings, he taught something quite understandable, quite practical. He taught the Eightfold Path. So this is for human beings, this teaching. And we're not talking about the teaching he gave for the devas. We'll keep that for another night. I'll have to invite somebody else to give that talk. I can only give the talk on what the teaching is for human beings, because I'm a human being and that I can relate to. When I become a deva, then maybe I'll teach the other one. At present, I can only teach what is relevant to a human being, because I experience this teaching as a human being. So the Eightfold Path is like right aspiration or right thought. This is something we can see within ourselves, the tendency, we have the ability to think. And we can see the various types of thoughts, the tendency or the mental, you can call it the mental force, to go towards the negative, destructive, cruel, selfish, or to go towards the more sort of positive, kind, generous, compassionate. We can see that within our own minds, can't we? I'm sure most of you have thoughts much the same as I have. And I'm sure all of you have very noble thoughts at times, thoughts of giving, thoughts of kindness, thoughts of compassion. And maybe occasionally one or two of you may have one or two thoughts of the opposite type, such as vindictive or cruel. like to really tear that head off, or that nasty mosquito, or sort of cruel thought, wanting to hurt, ill will, like wanting to put down, wanting to sort of some way or other take advantage, or very sort of selfish thought, wanting to get things just for oneself. These are things we can see within our own minds. All the Buddha said was, cultivate the right thought. What is right thought? That which is conducive towards peace, towards purity, towards enlightenment. Remember, we are responsible for our karma. We are responsible for what we are. What we think is already contributing towards what we are. What we tend to think, we end up one. Right speech. And I spoke on this one of the other weeks. I won't go into it in any great detail. We all know about how we talk so much and how much trouble we get into by talking so much. So we've decided at the monastery that for the next 3 months we're going to observe noble silence. All the monks are going to, not all the monks, I'm going to do the talking as usual. So I keep on getting into trouble, and the other monks can have 3 nice quiet months of not saying anything wrong, not saying anything wrong, not saying anything right either, not saying anything at all. Time for quiet contemplation. But in actual fact, the Buddha taught right speech, not that we should be silent. It is actually, truthfully, the Buddha laid down a rule forbidding monks to determine silence. So you can't have a Buddhist order of monks that's silent. And make that their practice. I will never speak for the rest of my life. That's an offense for a monk to determine anything like that. He's not allowed to. He's requested to develop right speech, not no speech. So we have the ability to speak. The Buddha just use this in a way which is conducive to harmony, to peace, to tranquility, rather than in a way conducive to conflict, suffering. And so right speech consists of not lying, not malicious backbiting, not abusing, and not idle chatter. Very simple. Right action is using our bodies again in a way which, remember what we are aspiring to. You know, we started off saying we're aspiring for peace, insight, enlightenment. And if you remember that enlightenment is synonymous with peace and purity, purity from greed, hatred, and delusion, then you must be growing towards that. If you want to be on the path, that's what we are growing towards. So our thoughts must gravitate towards that. Our speech must gravitate towards that. Our actions must gravitate towards that. So in our actions, we're cultivating actions which are conducive to peace, to purity. So we don't go around killing, stealing, committing adultery. We don't go around drinking, taking intoxicants, because those actions are not conducive to peace, nor to tranquility, nor to purity. So that's the right action, right livelihood. As a monk, one has requested not to do certain things. But the right livelihood for a monk is very specialized. Right livelihood for lay people is not quite so specialized. Basically what it's saying is, don't earn your keep at the expense of others. We shouldn't be earning our living through the exploitation, through the hurting, or through the encouragement of exploitation and hurting of others. And that is very simple to reflect on, to see. Now there's this is very simple moral principles. And if quite often in a society which is based on moral principles, that society is very harmonious, regardless of place, regardless of time, regardless of political situation. Like, what's really important, whether the Liberal Party wins the elections tomorrow or whether the Labour Party. Who should win that election? Well, I cast my vote for, I don't vote, see, but I always cast my vote for moral people, in the sense of I see the great need for morality in this world. If any system, regardless of what party, regardless of what political sort of ism it is, if it's made up of moral people, it will be perfect. If it's a moral party based on compassion and kindness, it will be perfect. So, for a Buddhist, that's a very important basis for choosing government. Of course, you may find it difficult to find to find candidates who will come up to that, but keep that one in mind, that it is an important consideration. Because beyond the isms, what gives the quality to a system is the quality of people in it. So morality is a very, very important aspect. Now, the rest of the teaching, the rest of the path is to do with developing certain qualities that we already have, but strengthening them so as to make it easier to keep this practice up. So we have right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, which is a practice of meditation. And that's what we have been doing here this evening. And when you do that, then you can reflect as your mind becomes more energetic, awake, more aware, more one-pointed. You can reflect more closely on your experience of life, on the Four Noble Truths. You can be much more responsible for your thoughts, your speech, your actions. And you keep on developing this path. And so every factor supports the other factor. So that if you take it to its ultimate conclusion, if you really cultivate these factors fully, yes, too will achieve the peace of the Buddha, the enlightenment of the Buddha. And that is the only true test, the only true verification that there is for Buddhism. When you know for yourself, then it's beyond speculation, then it's beyond belief. So that the Buddha in the end said, the Buddha can only point the way. It is up to you to walk the path. So he pointed the way by laying down this path and encouraged us all to walk the path by practicing, by reflecting. Very, very important, this reflecting before one even jumps into it. Know what you're jumping into. Why? Why are we cultivating these things? Have the right view, and then just the right thoughts and right speech, right action, right livelihood. You are cultivating those with understanding. And the mind itself, cultivating the mind through meditation. So that this is full moon of July, commemorating this very important occasion, this turning of the wheel of the Dhamma. And people say, well, there was one, in the scriptures in Buddhism, it is recorded that the Buddha said something like that the teachings of the Buddha are only going to last, actually I read that he said it was only going to last 500 years. But then some people say 5,000 years, so I don't know. But actually and then it goes on to say, but because Venerable Ananda insisted and convinced the Buddha to ordain women, then it was only going to last half that long. And people come to all sorts of conclusions about these statements, making all sorts of things about it. And I heard that in Thailand there was this one of the minor, I think, not so reputable Christian groups, so not one of the mainstream Christian groups, had put out some. I read it actually, a sheet of they were taking these statements from the Buddhist scriptures and then converting them for the Christian, their particular propagation. This wasn't an official Christian thing. And one of them was quoting the Buddha saying that his teaching would only last 500 years, and how after this 500 years, then the Bodhisattva would appear, and on, would have the marks on his hands, and all sorts of wonderful, strange things as far as a Buddhist is concerned. Now what the Buddha meant by 500 years, I think, is exactly what he meant by 500 monks. Everywhere the Buddha went, there were 500 monks with him, to the number, to the one, never 501. It means a long time. How long? He started the wheel rolling. How long will it keep rolling? It depends on how many people get behind it and keep it turning. He just started it rolling. That's only the start of it. Every human being who's heard that teaching, who's applied it to some degree, who's seen the fruits of it to some degree, has given it momentum. And that's why that wheel is still rolling today. Not just because of the Buddha's enlightenment, but because there have been human beings who've been continually hearing it, they can relate to it. It's to do with me, my life. And they apply it, they see results. That's giving the wheel momentum. It's turning the wheel again and again and again. And so when we hear this teaching, and then when we practice it as we are doing together like this, we are turning the wheel of the Dhamma as well. By establishing this center, by having monks ordaining, by having lay people practicing and studying and growing in confidence, it's turning the wheel. And it will keep turning, regardless of how many hundreds or thousands of years. As long as there are people doing this, the wheel will keep turning. And that will always be for the benefit of all humanity. So I offer these many words, reflection on this full moon of Asalha, July, in commemoration of the first sermon given by the Lord Buddha at Isipatana to the 5 ascetics. And at the end of that sermon, Venerable Kondanya became a Sotapanna. He was perfectly established in truth. Not completely enlightened, but had complete confidence. He said, yes, all that is conditioned is unsatisfactory. All that arises has to pass away. And his mind, the eye of the mind, opened and saw truth. And they called it Anya Kondanya, the one who knows. Kondanya who knows. So, having spoken my allotted time or beyond, are there any questions this evening?
Last week, Ajahn, I sort of asked about Buddhism and evolution and that, and you said, well, like Darwinism, with sort of any sort of people sort of wasn't any great proof in that. What about, I didn't say it wasn't a great proof, but there was sort of doubt and, didn't say that, evolution is total truth. Like in Buddhism, okay, everyone knows it's right not to sort of kill and steal and that, but that's sort of like with a lot of religions. I know it doesn't really matter if there wasn't a Buddha or wasn't. Even so, isn't it sort of like lot of, in this day and age, there's a lot of turmoil in that, and fighting and also political unrest. It seems like it's not a total cop-out, but it still seems to me like I know a bit of a cop-out though in some ways, because like times change, and when the Buddha lived, I know there was a lot of unrest in that, but right now we're in a stage of sort of ecological or maybe like nuclear war, and it seems like it's fine to sit up there and meditate and do things like that, and I know that you're taking responsibility for yourself, but it seems to be an urgent need for change everywhere. I know that's not your fault or my fault, maybe that's your fault because you've done less towards causing it, but I still think I was thinking that things have changed, and maybe like Buddhism sort of should really change with the times, or like you were saying last week about killing and that, and how people had to use their own wisdom. You don't have any wisdom.
Well, you must be very careful when quoting, because I do feel sometimes we're very so quote too loosely. I must be very careful, because it can be not quite accurate. There's quite a few questions there. One about evolution. I simply said that the Darwin presentation of evolution is there's nothing that would oppose any teachings in Buddhism in it. It just follows the laws of cause and effect. Perfectly all right. But I said that the simple presentation of Darwinism today is questioned even among some scientists, in that there is not enough time or scope for possibility of this to happen within the lifespan of this world, within the building structures present. So people are talking about maybe a grander image of the whole universe and life evolving in the whole universe, and even then still seems maybe something else. And I just said, in Buddhism, the something else is mind. That's what I said. Darwinism is completely compatible with Buddhist explanation of the ways things operate in nature, cause and effect, continuous change. We completely agree. Change, structured change, not haphazard, accidental. Causes, suitable causes brings about the particular result. Secondly, regardless of times changing, yes, we say this over and over. The whole thing is dynamic change. That's all there is. Life is changing. Society is changing. State of the world, the ecology is changing. But the same principles apply. Always the same principles are there. Now, the teaching of the Buddha is not is not pointing to a static thing. It's pointing to the way things are, regardless of the things now, present situation, or the situation 2,500 years ago. The way things are is an understanding in depth of the reality now. The reality is always now. It can never be another time. An understanding in depth is what the Buddhist teaching is pointing at. So we're not stagnant. There's always now, understanding in depth of the situation now. That is very, very immediate. Problems, yes, definitely problems. The world much more complicated than it was in the time of the Buddha. Far more complicated. Far more variety. Far more powerful weapons and conflicts. But the same principles apply. The real source, what is the real source of starvation? What is the real source of war? Whether you're fighting with a bow and arrow, or whether you're throwing missiles at each other. It's the same source. Greed, hatred and delusion in the minds of human beings, or the minds of living beings. That's the source of conflict, of strife, of wars, cruelty, exploitation, tension, friction. The rest, regardless of whether they're fighting in millions or whether they're fighting just husband and wife, it's the same war coming from the same place. Greed, hatred and delusion. Now, recognizing that, certainly scope has changed, variety has changed, but the same source, always the same source. What do we do about it? There's various approaches. We can take the two extremes. Many people assume that the one extreme of the religious is to just shut out the world and just concentrate on myself. Not interested in anybody else. Just let me become enlightened. Well, that's one extreme. The other one is the social worker who's determined to change society for the better, out there changing everybody, fighting for peace, and saving, helping, giving relentlessly, completely disinterested in oneself. Two extremes. Neither of those are realistic at all. Wherever you go, you can't set yourself separate from the world. You're always in the world. Whatever you do, you can't do it without any self because you have a sense of self. Now, in Buddhism, we like the middle way is very important. Each person has to take responsibility for oneself. You can't, what can you do as an individual? It comes to that, what can you do? And each one of us makes a choice. I choose to stand for Prime Minister, to want to become Prime Minister, because I choose that is, either from altruistic or selfish or whatever, but I decide that is what I can do. The best thing I can do is to become Prime Minister. I decide the best thing I can do is to become a doctor. I decide the best thing I can do is to become a monk. Right, so we all come from it. What is the best thing you can do? Now we all now, which one is the best decision? According to your decision is the best, according to you. But if we look now, again, what is the best way to resolve the problems of this world? And what is the best way? If one has to say the best way, you're making it very hard. What is a good way? There are many good ways. But what is very, very important is to remember the source of all problems, the source of the real conflict. Society is in the way it is because of the individuals that make up society, and the individual is the way that individual is because of the mind, the quality of mind. What is the best way to solve that? If you can add one peaceful person to the world, that is already a great achievement. So the monastic life, what it's aiming at is primarily monks don't add to the confusion, the suffering, the hatred, the destruction, exploitation in the world. They at least don't add to that. That's already maybe not a plus, but it's not a minus. At least they're not a nuisance anyway. They're not a... I hope we're not. But then, the idea is that they just don't remain quite like that. They also cultivate, very positive qualities, developing moral impeccability, kindness, compassion, wisdom, so that they can, even if they don't take an active role, they can be an example maybe, just by their very presence, a reminder to people, an example. And some of them who have a gift maybe can even take an active role. When you have peace, you can give peace. When you have wisdom, you can give wisdom. You can share. You don't have to hide away all the time, but you can only give what you have. If you don't have it, you can't give it yet. So that the monastic life is for people who decide that for them the best way to approach the problem of living is to work towards the center, the source, remove the source of problem within themselves so they can be an example, and then also show others the way. It's very important. Just like you don't resent a doctor, somebody wanting to be a doctor having to spend 6 years at university where he's a complete burden on the whole system and the whole society. It costs an awful lot of money to keep a medical student in university. But you don't resent it because at the end of it he's going to be a doctor, and when he's a doctor he can really help a few people. The same with the monkhood. It's a training, it's offering an opportunity, a system whereby a person can cultivate and grow so that then he has something or that person, he or she, has something more to offer humanity. So, this is not to say that it's everybody should become monks, because some people feel a real need to be involved in society, and that's fine. Be involved. Certainly there's need for, and there's social workers, people who take an interest in helping the underprivileged and the deprived and the starving and the sick and the poor and the old. For people to be out there doing those things is also very necessary. Very necessary. But there will never be an end to it. Never. You can be out there saving the poor, but there will never be an end to the poor. As long as there is birth, there will be old age, there will be sickness, there will be death. There was this young lady, and I think she was Canadian, came to the monastery one day, and I took her to visit Ajahn, and she'd been in Thailand for a year as some sort of exchange, something like a Peace Corps, a Canadian equivalent of Peace Corps, whatever they call it. And she was like a midwife, helping, bringing little babies into the world. And she came and took her, pay our respects to Ajahn Chah, and he's sitting there, and he's talking with her. I was interpreting, and he asked her, what do you do? What's your job? And I said, she's a midwife. And he said, that's starting from the wrong end. There's never an end to that. You should stop them getting in there in the first place. I was too embarrassed to translate. But not in any way a vulgar statement. What that means is that, really, I reflected on that later on, and how true. This sort of what we're talking about, the social worker, the person helping the sick, the old, the dying, and it's very necessary, but there is no end to it. As long as there is birth, you're always going to have old people and sick people, and you always have to be looking after them. So where do you start? Go back to the source. This is what the Buddha did. There is old age, sickness, death. There is conflict. There is frustration, lamentation, grief, despair. What's the source of that? And he looked deeply and he said, birth is the source of that. What's the source of birth? It's becoming. What's the source of becoming? Attachment. What's the source of attachment? It's desire. What's the source of desire? It's feeling. And he went right back. Feeling, then contact, then the senses, then body and mind. And he went right back. Consciousness, past karma, right back. And he said, oh, I have found you. Ignorance, you are the source. And I see through you. No longer will you build a house for me. And this is, we are not here to negate the value or the nobility. And monastic life is, as a monk, I'm not here to challenge or negate the wonderful work being done by many, many people and its need or the validity or the nobility of it. I agree with it all. I encourage it. But we mustn't forget the source. Mustn't forget. And some people will feel it may be best to get right to the source. Right to the root. Bring it to an end. And maybe that will be the best thing you can do for all of humanity, all of existence. You go into this room and there are all these people shouting, and some of them are shouting awful things, and some of them are shouting really nice things and high ideals, but they're all shouting. And you go in there and you start shouting even more higher ideals, and you just end up being another one shouting. But maybe if you go in there and sit quietly and just be completely still and quiet, somebody will notice you. What's wrong with him? Why isn't he shouting? Maybe Maybe there's something there. What's he doing just sitting quietly like that? Maybe they'll try it. Not passing a judgment or negating anything. We're just one of the options. But it's a very important one.
I was also thinking about, like in this day and age, you have a lot of things like pollution. And that would affect the mind more, like this sort of seems to me like, you see like even food we all have preservatives in it, and this would, like I think this would make it very dull. I mean, that's what I just find very hard. Like I was just talking to someone about, like go live in a monastery, you have to, food you're given, and a lot of the food probably isn't sort of fresh food, and with that, like, he was saying, well, a lot of people sort of get on this sort of cosmic trip and think that, like, they forget about the body and sort of, the food we eat is very important in that as well. That's what I'm saying about changing times and that, like, they didn't have things when most of it was fresh in those days, didn't have certain pollution in the water, and, even like now, you have this theory that there's a lot of, radiation fallout from nuclear tests in, sort of in the Pacific and that, that's bound to affect people's minds and imbalances and the chemicals that are, sort of poured into the food and that we eat.
That's why there's even greater need for the monastic and life and the meditation. Very, very greater need for it. Because, you really have to look after the mind now. You really have to cultivate clarity, precision. You really have to cultivate awareness, concentration, wisdom. But, all these things about the body and food, yes, there's truth to that. And if the mind is still under the power of the body, through attachment, the state of the body will control the mind. But if you cultivate awareness, concentration, wisdom, so that you see through the body, your body, doesn't matter what you eat, doesn't matter what affects, will not disturb the mind. The mind will not be under the power of the body. Cannot confuse the mind. Cannot, talking about the essence of mind, not talking about thinking. It's true. I mean, if you maybe they give you something that sort of causes brain damage, your thinking faculty is damaged. Your reasoning faculty may be damaged. Your memory may be damaged. But the essence of mind, which is wisdom, which is purity, which is emptiness, that is not affected. So, but all of that is just speculation. Speculation is, it can be done. It is being done. There are people doing it. It's a wise thing to do. But before we continue, I'd like to invite you all for tea and further conversation, discussion. Just like to make an announcement regarding tomorrow, Sunday, open day at the monastery, marking the beginning of the rains retreat. For everybody's invited and involved. Bring all your friends. 9:30 Sunday morning at the monastery. Hopefully we'll have sunshine and wonderful weather. But even if it rains, it'll be beautiful. So don't even look at the weather. Just get up and get in the car. Come along for the day. In a few weeks' time, the last Sunday of this month, we're having a fundraising dinner here, Sunday evening, last Sunday of this month. I don't know the date, I'll mention it again, but sort of try to keep it in mind and bring your friends along and come for a nice evening. I all reminded that we do have a library and that it's now in the house, not in the hall anymore, and people are members or people who are kind of inclined to be supportive of the society by becoming a member, which simply means that one appreciates what the society is offering and what it's making available through its teachings and its resources, that you support that, like to offer some gesture of support by becoming a member and paying subscription fees, then you're quite welcome to use the library, which is now being re-catalogued and set up so that it will be much easier and better for you. Maybe we can pay our respects to the Buddha, and then please
stand before me on the sign of infinity, all you of the earth. With the granting of the law of provenation comes the application of change. I will give you the key. And with this knowledge, please realize, comes the responsibility of sharing it. I will show you the way. It's very simple. Throughout the universe, there is order in the movement of the planets, in nature, and in the functioning of the human mind. A mind that is in its natural state of order is in harmony with the universe, and such a mind is timeless. Your life is an expression of your mind. You are a creator of your own universe. For as a human being, you are free to will whatever state of being you desire through the use of your thoughts and words. There is great power there. Can be a blessing or a curse. It's entirely up to you. For the quality of your life is brought about by the quality of your thinking. Think about that. Thoughts produce actions. Look at what you are thinking. See the pettiness and the envy and the greed and the fear and all the other attitudes that cause you pain and discomfort. Realize that the one thing you have absolute control over is your attitude. See the effect that it has on those around you. For each life is linked to all life, and your words carry with them chain reactions, like a stone that is thrown into a pond. If your thinking is in order, your words will flow directly from the heart, creating ripples of love. If you truly want to change your world, my friends, you must change your thinking. Reason is your greatest tool. It creates an atmosphere of understanding, which leads to caring, which is love. Choose your words with care. Go forth with love.